Welcome back. I'm Melissa Pineda, and today I will actually be doing something a little different. I'm going to be reviewing two books instead of one, the Iliad and the Odyssey, both written by Homer. I'm doing this because they're very interconnected, written by the same person, and because they're just the most epic stories ever told. So before I begin, if there's anything you hear that you like or find interesting, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, why should you listen to my review? I'm going to tell you very briefly about these two epic stories, which are really poems. If you're not familiar with them, if you've only seen the movie Troy, for instance, with Brad Pitt, or if you just don't really know too much about them, I'm going to tell you what they're about, and I'm going to tell you why they're amazing, and why basically every story written, every movie made ever since these two were initially invented or written down have copied that model. So like Homer wrote these poems. They were poems to begin with, but he didn't necessarily invent them. Like these stories were in existence for hundreds of years before he wrote them down. They were part of an oral tradition and everyone seemed to know about them. He's the one that just wrote them down. And we don't know too much about Homer. He lived during the 8th or 7th century before Christ, and Sparta existed approximately 1180 before Christ as well. And it's crazy because we didn't even know Troy existed until very recently, where it was discovered where Troy would have been, which is modern day Turkey. Modern day Turkey is where Troy had existed. So there's proof that this place existed. And who knows how much of the stories in the Iliad and the Odyssey are true. And these stories are just incredible because it's just packed with everything. It's packed with action, it's packed with passion, love, mythology, war. You have the Iliad. Okay, so you have a few characters here, a few main characters. You have Helen of Troy. I think everyone's heard of her. Helen of Troy was actually Queen of Sparta initially because she was married to King Menelaus, who was the king of Sparta. Now his brother was King Agamemnon, a Greek king. And you have different Greek kings at this time, but he's a big one. His brother's king of Sparta, and so what ends up happening is she's abducted essentially by Paris, who is a prince in Troy. And Priam is the king of Troy at this time. So he has the two sons, Paris and Hector. And so Paris is in love with Helen, and she ends up, being in love with him as well, leaving her husband, her child, and she is now living in Troy. And so for 10 years, the Greeks waged war against Troy because of Helen, because of this this huge insult, and the queen is living somewhere else now. There's a war, it's draining everyone's resources, and it's clear the Trojans are not going to give up. So what ends up happening is Odysseus, who is a king in his own right, a soldier for King Agamemnon, and so he comes up with the idea for the Trojan horse. So the horse made of wood, where all the Greek soldiers are inside. And then the Trojan horse gets taken inside the city. So there's a big party and everyone gets drunk. And then the Greeks come out of the horse, kill everyone, enslave the women and children, and that's it. And that's the end. And Helen has to go back to Sparta. And many people died, including Achilles. So Achilles was a demigod. He had one parent that was a god, one was a mortal, and he's one of the main characters of the story too. And it's very interesting because as a god, he's depicted as sort of heartless in many ways. But King Priam appeals to Achilles and Achilles' love of his father by asking for his son's body back, because Achilles kills Hector, who fights in place of Paris, who was just not man enough to do so. And then he's killed in a horrible way and his body's dragged around the city. So Priam goes, and it's one of my favorite parts of the Iliad because as a parent, you can just feel his pain, and he is here begging the man that killed his son, please give me my son's body back. And Achilles takes pity on him and could have killed him, but didn't. The incredible thing too is that no one was bad. Individual people were bad in this story. Absolutely. They did bad things, horrible things. But it's not like the Greeks were fighting these barbaric people, godless, virtueless people. No, they weren't. And it wasn't true for the reverse either. They're both very civilized peoples, and they're fighting a very human war. And so it's interesting because it's not like this good versus evil necessarily. And then you have all the gods involved too. You have gods placing bets, picking sides. And Greek mythology in itself is so fascinating. There's all of that happening too. And I'm not going to talk to you about all of that. It's just, this is why you should want to read it, because it's incredible. But that's the Iliad, okay? And it's very connected to the Odyssey, to what happens next. Okay. Now we have the Odyssey. This is the second part to this epic tale. You have Odysseus, who came up with the idea for the Trojan horse. Now, he is a great Greek warrior, and he is probably one of the most famous Greek heroes in all of mythology. So you have Odysseus. And now in the Odyssey, it's basically the story of him getting home, trying to get home to Ithaca. Now, he's king of Ithaca, so a king in his own right, but also someone that fought for the king. Fought for King Agamemnon, sorry, I always find it hard to say his name, for King Agamemnon. And so he now has to make it back. And his story, trying to make it back to Ithaca, is also epic. There's really no other word to describe these two books. By the way, it's just epic. So now he encounters a Cyclops, okay? He gets caught up with a goddess and ends up living with her for a number of years, infatuated with her until he kind of breaks the spell. Now, he has a queen waiting at home for him, Penelope, whom he loves very much, and he has a son, Telemachus. So he has Telemachus, who was just a baby when he left. Now, from when Odysseus leaves to when he returns, 20 years have passed, 20 long years. And so, all right, there's a couple things happening behind the scenes. So we have Odysseus trying to get home, okay, on a boat, and all of the people he's with ends up dying. All of them. He's the only one that survives, all right? And so you have that happening. While at the same time, you have kind of this story of what happened after Helen returned to Sparta. Because, so I don't know about you, but I was always curious, like, okay, what happened to Helen? Like, all the men in Troy were killed, apparently, from what we knew. And then you have Helen, who's brought back with all the women of Troy that weren't killed. They were all taken back as slaves. So were the children. So she's caused all of this, and she has to go back to her husband, who's obviously not very happy with her, nor would any of the Spartan people be very happy with her, or the Greeks for that matter too, because of all the years essentially wasted fighting for her. So I was curious. Now we find out, because what ends up happening is Telemachus so Odysseus' son ends up going out because he wants to find out what happened to his father, right? Like, I've been waiting. I don't know my father. Is he still alive? Is he not? At this time in Ithaca, his mom is basically being harassed by suitors. Like, everyone wants to know, when are you going to get married? Like, you need to remarry. This kingdom has to belong to someone else. And so that's happening. And these suitors are living in her palace and eating her food and being very disrespectful. So Telemachus knows this. And that's why then Athena comes to him. There's, again, the gods. So the goddess Athena comes to him and kind of encourages him in a disguise, like, you really need to find out where your father is and what happened to him, and kind of bring him home. So the gods are at play once again, always an interesting part of the story. And Telemachus goes out and he ends up going to Menelaus. Now, Agamemnon, we find out when he returns home, his wife had been having an affair, and her lover end up killing Agamemnon. Telemachus goes and meets Menelaus, and then we see Helen. And Helen comes down the stairs and she looks beautiful, because of course she was like the most beautiful woman in the world at this time, right? And you're reading this part like, oh my gosh, like, what's she gonna say? And so what do you think she says? Well, she ends up saying, I was a whore. I was a whore. I was tricked by Aphrodite. I was not in love with Paris. Like, I can't believe what I did. I brought shame to my husband, my house, my country, other women, everything. And Menelaus was like, yeah, you did. But I forgive you. And so you're wondering when you're reading this, does she actually mean this? Or is this just part of its survival? Because I think she went willingly. She ended up falling in love with Paris. But anyway, this is an aside because it's just interesting. It leaves it open to interpretation. Like, everything she's saying Can you take it at face value? Is this someone that recognized the errors of her ways? And maybe because she did cause so much turmoil, destruction, sadness, deaths, or is it that she needs to say that to survive? Otherwise, Menelaus could make her life, well, horrible. So you find that out, which is very interesting. The character of Telemachus develops a bit. You have the gods playing their roles. And then you have Odysseus' journey home. And what ends up happening is Telemachus does find his father. And it's very interesting the way that happens, the way people start kind of figuring it out. Like there's a maid, an old maid that took care of Odysseus when he was young, took care of Telemachus as a baby, and she recognizes him even in his disguise. So Athena had disguised him. And so Telemachus and Odysseus basically end up taking everyone out, taking all the suitors out, killing everyone. And it's in quite a drawn out way. This like he plays this role. You think he'd run in and like, you know, disclose everything to Penelope, who he hasn't seen in 20 years, but he doesn't. And so you're just reading this thinking, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? So yeah, this is what happens. Bloodbath, kills all the suitors. Then Penelope and Odysseus are reunited, and that's that story with so much packed in there. And just as an example, I'm not going to go through every book and movie since then that has been modeled off of the Iliad and the Odyssey, but just look at Robin Hood, for instance. Robin Hood is that. He is Odysseus coming home, seeing what has happened to his kingdom, his father. And then Robin Hood with the bow and arrow, right? Like that happened in the Odyssey, where Odysseus and Telemachus kill all the suitors like that. Like there's so much there. And that's why they're still so relevant to today. They're epic tales and everyone should read them. So I'm going to leave it there for now. I was going to touch on the Iliad by Virgil, which is another epic poem written sort of modeled off of the Odyssey, but I'm not going to touch on that today. I'm going to do another review on that because there's just so much in this one. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If there's anything that you've liked, found interesting, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And by all means, pick yourself up a copy of the Iliad and the Odyssey. They're just so good. And thank you so much for listening. Until next time.